Long after the paint has faded, the frames have rusted, and the dashboards have cracked under decades of sun, there is one part that keeps going. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't make headlines. It simply refuses to stop. The Toyota 22R was never designed to be legendary, yet it became something far rarer. An engine that outlived the truck wrapped around it. Across job sites, farms, trails, and forgotten back roads, these engines kept running while everything else slowly fell apart. Trucks were scrapped, bodies swapped, and interiors replaced, but the same four cylinders kept firing. Not because they were powerful, not because they were advanced, but because they were built to endure a kind of real-world abuse most engines never survive. This story isn't about speed, innovation, or performance numbers. It's about longevity in its purest form. An engine that tolerated missed oil changes, overheating summers, cold starts, and endless miles without complaint. While newer designs promised efficiency and refinement, this one quietly kept doing its job, year after year, often unnoticed. That raises an uncomfortable question. How did something so basic become so unkillable? Why did an engine designed for utility become a benchmark for durability? And why, despite its reputation, was it eventually left behind? The answers aren't found in marketing brochures or dyno charts. They're buried in design choices, priorities, and an era when reliability mattered more than optimization. To understand why the 22R refused to leave, you first have to understand what it was never meant to be. And that difference changed everything forever. When the Toyota 22R was conceived, trucks were not symbols of identity. They were tools. They existed to haul, tow, idle, crawl, and repeat the same tasks day after day without complaint. In that world, nobody asked for excitement, they asked for dependability. And Toyota listened. The priorities were clear from the beginning. This engine didn't need to impress on paper. It needed to start every morning, tolerate long hours under load, and survive owners who treated maintenance as optional. Power was secondary. Innovation was unnecessary. What mattered was that it worked, even when conditions were far from ideal. Toyota engineered the 22R for farmers, contractors, delivery drivers, and small business owners. People who measured value in uptime, not horsepower. The engine was easy to service, forgiving of mistakes, and intentionally conservative. Parts were accessible, tolerances allowed for wear. Nothing about it was delicate, nothing needed special attention. Crucially, the 22R was never positioned as a hero. It wasn't advertised as revolutionary or cutting edge. It lived quietly under hoods, doing its job without ceremony. That anonymity became its strength. While flashier engines chased numbers and headlines, the 22R earned trust through repetition. It proved itself one cold start, one long workday, one neglected oil change at a time. This approach reflected a different era in automotive thinking. Trucks were expected to be abused, not admired. Engines were designed to tolerate reality, not perfection. And within that mindset, Toyota made choices that would later seem almost stubbornly old-fashioned. Those choices didn't create instant legends. They created something slower, deeper, and far more enduring. To understand why the 22R lasted so long, you have to look beneath its simplicity and into the decisions hidden inside it. Longevity does not happen by accident. In the case of the Toyota 22R, it was the result of deliberate restraint. Toyota engineers chose conservative tuning that placed minimal stress on internal components, allowing the engine to operate comfortably below its limits. It rarely chased high revs, never flirted with fragile tolerances, and avoided complexity that could compromise reliability. Internally, the 22R favored strength over sophistication. Thick castings, sturdy bearings, and simple valve train geometry created an engine that could absorb punishment without cascading failure. Heat, vibration, and wear were expected realities, not edge cases. Instead of engineering around perfect conditions, Toyota engineered around imperfect ones. Equally important was what the 22R refused to adopt. There were no fragile performance compromises, no aggressive compression targets, and no experimental systems pushed into service prematurely. Fuel delivery, ignition, and airflow were kept straightforward, making failures easier to diagnose and repairs easier to complete. When something went wrong, it failed predictably rather than catastrophically. This simplicity created tolerance. Tolerance for dirty oil, tolerance for missed service intervals, tolerance for owners who treated the engine as an appliance rather than a machine requiring constant attention. Every design choice quietly expanded the margin between normal operation and mechanical disaster. Viewed individually, none of these decisions were revolutionary. Together, they formed a philosophy. Toyota traded peak output for consistency, efficiency for endurance, and innovation for certainty. The result was not an engine that impressed reviewers, but one that earned trust through survival. That trust didn't come from marketing claims. It came from engines that kept running when logic said they shouldn't. And once that reputation took hold, the 22R stopped being just an engine. It became proof that durability could be designed on purpose. Long-term survival was not luck, but the inevitable outcome of disciplined engineering choices alone. Engines are rarely judged in laboratories. They are judged in neglect. The Toyota 22R spent its life in conditions no spec sheet could justify. Oil changes were skipped. Coolant ran low. Fuel quality varied wildly. Trucks idled for hours, worked under constant load, and were shut down hot over and over again. In those environments, most engines degrade quietly before failing suddenly. The 22R did the opposite. It ran rough, ran tired, and ran imperfectly, but it kept running. Overheating episodes that would warp heads elsewhere became stories instead of endings. Warning lights were ignored. Maintenance schedules became suggestions. Mechanics learned this pattern early. A customer would arrive convinced the engine was finished, only to leave with the same motor still alive, patched together and ready for more work. Owners learned they could push it further, delay repairs longer, and ask more of it than logic allowed. And the engine responded by surviving. This wasn't luck. It was tolerance playing out in the real world. Clearances absorbed wear. Conservative tuning reduced stress. Simple systems failed gradually instead of catastrophically. Even when neglected, the engine gave warnings instead of ultimatums. What makes this endurance remarkable is its consistency. The same stories repeated across climates, continents, and decades. Different trucks, different owners, same outcome. The engine outlasted frames, transmissions, suspensions, and interiors. At some point, survival like this stops feeling surprising and starts feeling inevitable. Which leads to a larger question. If the 22R could endure abuse this reliably, why did engines like it disappear? The answer has less to do with failure and more to do with progress. That tension between durability and modernization would ultimately decide the 22R's fate, even as countless examples continued running long after their trucks were written off entirely by owners who no longer expected anything else anyway. When the automotive world changed, the 22R didn't fail. The rules did. As emissions standards tightened and efficiency targets climbed, engines were asked to do more with less, while producing cleaner exhaust and smoother performance. The 22R's strength, its conservative, old-school design, became its liability. Built around simplicity and tolerance, the engine was never optimized for precision control or rapid adaptation. It could survive abuse, but it couldn't easily satisfy evolving emissions systems without added complexity. Catalysts, sensors, and tighter calibrations demanded engines that operated closer to the edge. The 22R was designed to stay far from it. At the same time, trucks themselves were changing. Buyers wanted quieter operation, better fuel economy, and car-like refinement. Reliability was still important, but it was no longer enough on its own. The market rewarded innovation, not endurance. What once defined quality was slowly redefined as outdated. From an engineering perspective, this created a conflict with no villain. The 22R wasn't flawed, it was mismatched to a new set of expectations. Improving emissions and efficiency required sacrificing the very margins that allowed it to live so long. Tight tolerances replaced forgiveness. Complexity replaced serviceability. So Toyota moved on. New engines delivered better numbers, met regulations, and aligned with modern priorities. On paper, they were superior in nearly every measurable way. But something subtle was lost in the transition. The retirement of the 22R wasn't an admission of failure. It was the end of an era where durability was allowed to outweigh optimization. The engine didn't become obsolete because it stopped working. It became obsolete because the world around it decided survival alone was no longer the goal. And in that shift, reliability transformed from virtue to inconvenience, leaving behind machines that aged gracefully but no longer fit spreadsheets, regulations, or trends that measured progress in cycles, updates, and short-term gains, rather than decades of uninterrupted service earned through patience, restraint, and respect for mechanical limits. When the 22R was phased out, it was replaced by engines that were cleaner, more efficient, and undeniably more advanced. On paper, they were better in nearly every measurable way. They produced more power, consumed less fuel, and met modern standards the 22R never could. Yet something unexpected happened once those replacements entered the real world. The older engines kept going. While newer power plants cycled through sensors, components, and increasingly complex systems, 22R-powered trucks remained in service. Not as collector's items or weekend toys, but as daily tools. They started in the cold, they idled through heat. They worked long after newer trucks were sidelined by issues that required specialized diagnostics and costly repairs. This wasn't a failure of modern engineering. It was a difference in priorities. New engines were designed to perform optimally within narrower margins. They relied on precision, tight tolerances, and systems that worked beautifully until they didn't. When problems appeared, they were often terminal rather than gradual. The 22R lived at the opposite end of that spectrum. It aged slowly. Problems announced themselves early. Repairs were straightforward. Its decline was measured in years, not sudden breakdowns. That predictability kept it alive long after logic suggested it should be retired. Over time, this contrast became impossible to ignore. Trucks built decades earlier were still earning their keep, while newer replacements came and went. Not because progress was wrong, but because something fundamental had been traded away. The 22R didn't outlive its replacements because it was superior in every way. It outlived them because it was built for a world that accepted limits, embraced simplicity, and valued engines that lasted longer than trends, technologies, or the vehicles surrounding them. Long after production ended, the Toyota 22R continues to exist in memory, not as a statistic, but as a standard. It represents a time when engineers were allowed to prioritize longevity over optimization, and when success was measured in decades of service rather than quarterly improvements. The 22R matters because it proved that restraint could be a strength. By accepting limits, Toyota created something owners could trust. That trust turned machines into companions, tools into partners, and engines into stories passed down between generations. Few modern power plants inspire that kind of loyalty. This engine also marks a shift in philosophy. Today's designs chase efficiency, compliance, and performance within ever narrower margins. They are impressive, but disposable by comparison. The 22R reminds us that durability is not accidental, and that simplicity is often a choice, not a compromise. Its legacy isn't about nostalgia for the past. It's about remembering what was valued and asking what was lost along the way. When people still speak about an engine decades after it stopped being relevant, it's because it earned that memory. The 22R outlived its truck, its era, and its replacements. And in doing so, it became something permanent in a world of replacement.